Thank you so very much for your time and happy birthday to you. Peace.
Good evening. My name is John Johnson. I am work for Lumen slash formerly CenturyLink. I currently work in complex translations, represented by CWA in Denver, Colorado. Just would like to take a couple minutes to further discuss the recent changes in regards to the observation of the Martin Luther King holiday. It was recently noted that the holiday Lumen has decided, after current and recent events that are ongoing, to extend that holiday to non-bargain for employees of the Lumen brand. My concern, I have 5 years of working with CenturyLink and Lumen, and on both sides of the aisle. And my concern is that the understanding of what Martin Luther King stood for is not being properly represented in the decision made by Lumen. I would like uh, for the opportunity for it to be known that extending the holiday to just a portion of the company, just being national non-represented folks within the Lumen company brand, is a direct slap in the face and slap in the face and offensive to those members that are currently represented and that understand the legacy of the Dr. Martin Luther King. We would like for the company leadership to take another look at this, what Martin Luther King stood for in his walk, and to know that he was walking for and marching for the union body and all men with no exclusion. We are asking for Lumen to make it right, not only for the non-represented folks, but to make it right company wide, being not national and bargain for employees of this company without further discussion. We would just like for this opportunity, would like if Martin Luther King holiday and observation was done with the right purpose in mind. If you take time to further observe his mission and his meaning, you will find that he extended the rights to all, regardless of your color, ethnicity, or gender. Thank you this evening for taking time to listen to my message and asking you to deeply reconsider your decision. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Vonda Wilkins, and I have worked at Lumen for 21 years. I work in the core department as an SSC in Phoenix, Arizona. And while non-union workers were being given Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day off as a paid holiday, 10,000 of my fellow union members and I were excluded. My reactions to this announcement when I heard about this, well, I felt a level of segregation, as our company has always identified us as one team representing our customers. However, treated differently behind the scenes in our day-to-day business operations. Well, I exemplify our unifying principles each and every day, and it starts with fairness. Martin Luther King Day should be a day for all workers, not just some. Don't erase Dr. King's legacy by using his holiday for union busting. We too would like to honor his day. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Art Clemens, and I have been an employee of the company we now call Lumen for almost 34 years. I'm a central office technician that works here in Seattle, and I have been a season ticket holder with the Seahawks for 15 years now. Go Hawks. In my 34 years, I have seen many changes. When I first started with US West, I felt like I was working for a company that valued people regardless of their skin color. As time has went on, the company has changed, and my experiences at this company have shown me that is not always the case. I keep hoping that as new managers are brought in, that everyone will be treated fairly, and I was hopeful this would be the case with Lumen. But once again, I have been let down. It's hard to believe that a company that claims to honor diversity and spends millions of dollars trying to teach us about cultural bias would dishonor Dr. Martin Luther King's legacy like this. Dr. Martin Luther King was about labor rights as well as human rights. Giving all of the Lumen employees the MLK Day holiday seems like the right thing for a company to do. But to turn around and say everyone except union employees get the day off is just another backhanded slap to the face that I have had to deal with. Why would Lumen dishonor Dr. Martin Luther King's legacy like this? Whoever made this decision should be ashamed of themselves. To the CEO, Jeff Story, I would like to say this. If you really want a company that people in the world see as a good place to work, then you need to do the right thing. This company has many great employees that want to celebrate Dr. Martin Luther King's legacy. Some are Caucasian, some are African American, and some are many different ethnicities. Some are union members, and some are not union members. All of us want to honor Dr. Martin Luther King's legacy, and all of us know right from wrong. I am not the type of person to just complain about things and do nothing, so I have worked my way up through the union to become the local CWA 7800 president. I am now in a position where I can try to fight back against racism and mistreatment. Thank you.
Here to talk today about Martin Luther King and what Martin Luther King meant to me as an individual worker of the CWA 6372. And as a Lumen employee, I'm somewhat offended. No, I'm very offended about not being able to have that day off and celebrate it with my family, because it is the day that I take off personally to go celebrate and participate in the different Martin Luther King events that they have in our city. My son years ago in the 7th grade wrote an article about Martin Luther King. It's called the Peace Meal. And we celebrate every year because of that article. He won a Fulbright Scholarship Award, and we were able to go to Washington, D.C. and honor him on that day. So I'm very offended of not being able to have that day off as an employee to spend with my family as all the other Lumen employees. For years, we have been challenged about unions and things that we have gone through. But one thing about Martin Luther King was one who stood not only for civil rights, but he stood for unions and the rights and equal rights of workers to make sure that their wages were fair and they were treated right on their jobs. Long before we have been a part of unions, people were being treated improperly about work rights and things that they were going through on their jobs. And so as an activist, the nations prepared and began to mark the world with unions to know that when we celebrate Martin Luther King, we celebrate a victory because of the unions and what he stood for. And especially in the day and time that we're living in with civil rights and everything that we're going through as a country, we need unions more than ever. Because not only is it important to us as workers, but also as our families. So Martin Luther King supported unions wholeheartedly, not only their membership, but he supported them as far as their employment. And during the death of Martin Luther King, unions somewhat fell off. But I believe in the day and time that we're living in, that the union needs to be reinstated and become strong again, because we're all brothers and sisters in Christ, and we're all brothers and sisters not only when we become union members, but when we come to work with one another on these jobs. And so I believe working people and all races and all of the individuals that we come in contact with, we should have a decent wage, and we should be working to keep jobs and working for a decent wage to help our families and progress and work with the same vision. So I'm very supportive and very activated about being a part of a union. So I just want to let you know, as we celebrate this year with Martin Luther King, not only do we celebrate his holiday, but we celebrate the legacy that he has left, not only for union workers and all of those in the world, but for our families and for the years to come. You have a good day.
Thank you all for sharing your stories with us this evening.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. stood for civil rights and workers' rights. He picketed, prayed, and protested with workers organizing for justice. He understood that there was a connection between the 244 years of legal enslavement of Africans and their children for the purpose of stealing their labor and the modern-day labor struggles he supported. He understood that slave owners stole humanity, freedom, and labor from enslaved people. And at the core of the depravity of slavery was the need for and theft of labor. It was brutally inhumane. Slavery both required and produced racism. Dr. King wrote that as a teenager, he understood that the, quote, inseparable twin of racial injustice was economic injustice, end quote. Dr. King constantly asserted that freedom and equality required union rights, protections against workplace discrimination, and access to good jobs. His work was deeply intertwined with labor unions and worker organizing. He did not just fight for Black workers, he fought for all workers. We cannot honor him while erasing his work with organized labor. Let us remember his true legacy, and by remembering, continue the work for the better future he dreamed. Woke washing is when a corporation, institution, or individual says or does something that signals their advocacy for a marginalized cause, but also continues to cause harm to vulnerable communities. Corporate woke washing is wrong, and Dr. King would have said so. Before he was assassinated, Dr. King regularly called out business leaders for not doing enough to create real equality. He constantly talked about the systemic changes needed in society, including good jobs, freedom from discrimination, and union rights. Claiming to honor Dr. King's legacy while busting unions is a classic example of corporate woke washing, and we, as union members, cannot let it go unchallenged. Corporations have a choice. Corporations can be either anti-racist or they can be anti-union, but they cannot honestly be both. We must educate ourselves, our families, our communities, and our employers about the true legacy of Dr. King so that together we can build a better world. Here we will share video, photographs, stories, and quotes from Dr. King, the Union Man. Recall that a primary function of slavery was to address, in the most despicable of ways, a labor shortage in America. American landowners enslaved people to steal their labor. In this 1967 NBC interview, Dr. King cites slavery as a primary source of racism against African Americans.
You can't thingify anything without depersonalizing that something. If you use something as a means to an end, at that moment you make it a thing and you depersonalize it. The fact is that the Negro was a slave in this country for 244 years. That was a willful thing that was done. The Negro was brought here in chains, treated in very inhuman fashion, and this led to the thingification of the Negro. So he was not looked upon as a person. He was not looked upon as a human being with the same status and worth as other human beings. And the other thing is that human beings cannot continue to do wrong without eventually rationalizing that wrong. So slavery was justified morally, biologically, theoretically, scientifically, everything else.
The importance of workers' rights and unions was at the forefront of the civil rights movement. Union members played a significant role in the March on Washington. Indeed, the March on Washington was officially called the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. The idea for the march came from longtime labor leader A. Philip Randolph, who is known for organizing the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. Martin Luther King Jr. and A. Philip Randolph, along with other organizers, put out a call for the March on Washington in May of 1963. The call to action read, "Let the Black laboring masses speak." One of the explicit demands of the March for Jobs and Freedom was the passage of the Fair Employment Practices Act, barring workplace discrimination. Other goals included a massive federal program to train and place unemployed workers of all races and a wage which would give all Americans a decent standard of living. Dr. King delivered his famous "I Have a Dream" speech at the March on Washington, and from the same podium, A. Philip Randolph stated, "The spirit and techniques that built the labor movement, founded churches, and now guide the civil rights revolution must be a massive crusade." And the president of the United Auto Workers, Walter Reuther, stated, "The job question is crucial because we will not solve education or housing or public accommodations as long as millions of American Negroes are treated as second-class economic citizens and denied jobs." Pictured here are Dr. King and UAW President Reuther, and below A. Philip Randolph. The sound system for the march was partially paid for by union dues. According to the United Auto Workers, Dr. King wrote an earlier version of the speech and borrowed office space at the union's headquarters in Detroit. And he delivered the speech in front of an audience that included tens of thousands of union members brought on buses and planes chartered by their unions. But labor's participation and the economic justice agenda of the Jobs and Freedom March have been written out of many narratives of the march. Honoring Dr. King's work and legacy while failing to acknowledge his work for labor rights and labor unions has become commonplace, particularly in corporate America. Pictures from the day show union posters in the crowd, including this rare color photograph from the day. You can see a union member carrying an IUE for full employment sign. IUE CWA is the industrial division of our union. The march forced President Kennedy to respond to the organizers' demands. At the bottom is a photo of the organizers, including Dr. King, Walter Reuther, and A. Philip Randolph, at a meeting with the president after the march. Dr. King thought, spoke, and wrote extensively about economic justice and the importance of the labor movement. He stated, "The labor movement was a principal force that transformed misery and despair into hope and progress." He said, "History is a great teacher. Now everyone knows that the labor movement did not diminish the strength of the nation, but enlarged it. By raising the living standards of millions, labor miraculously created a market for industry and lifted the whole nation to undreamed of levels of production. Those who attack labor forget these simple truths, but history remembers them." King also said, "Our needs are identical with labor's needs: decent wages, fair working conditions, livable housing, old age security, and health and welfare measures, conditions in which families can grow, have education for their children, and respect in the community. That is why Negroes support labor's demands and fight laws which curb labor. That is why the labor hater and the labor baiter is virtually always a twin-headed creature spewing anti-Negro epithets from one mouth and anti-labor propaganda from the other mouth." Here, Dr. King is seen with members from the retail, wholesale, and department store union who worked at Bloomingdale's in New York City. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated on April 4, 1968, while in Memphis supporting a historic strike by the union sanitation workers. The current national president of their union, AFSCME, is Lee Saunders. He stated, "Dr. King understood the importance of that strike. He understood the connection between economic rights and civil rights, and he gave his life in support of that strike." Next, we'll hear from Dr. King himself in the last speech he would ever give. He addressed the Memphis sanitation workers in support of their cause on April 3rd.
We are demanding that this city will respect the dignity of labor. So often we overlook the worth and the significance of those who are not in professional jobs, of those who are not in the so-called big jobs. But let me say to you tonight that whenever you are engaged in work that serves humanity and is for the building of humanity, it has dignity and it has worth. You are reminding not only Memphis, but you are reminding the nation that it is a crime for people to live in this rich nation and receive starvation wages. Somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest for rights.
We are also very glad to hear from supporters in the community.
Good evening. My name is Michael Reed. I'm the Vice President of the Denver chapter of the NAACP and a community activist for racial and economic justice. Today on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, I want to send a message of support for union members at Lumen, which is formerly CenturyLink. As union members, you stand together for good jobs and fairness at work. I also understand the importance of that worker solidarity, and so did Martin Luther King Jr. In his letter from a Birmingham jail, Dr. King famously wrote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. So it is with workers in a workplace. Individually, workers don't have the ability to solve problems with working conditions. But together you do. For Dr. King, the fight for workers' rights was at the heart of the civil rights movement. He walked the picket lines and supported workers in their fights for justice on the job. In fact, his last speech was going to give encouragement and strength to union sanitation workers in Memphis. So when I heard that Lumen, the leadership there had left union members out of the Martin Luther King holiday, I was surprised and disappointed. To me, that action, it demonstrated a profound lack of understanding of Dr. King's work and the ongoing work of social and racial justice. Racial justice will always be interconnected with economic justice and labor rights. Lumen executives need to learn from Dr. King's legacy. Don't use MLK Day for a union busting for starts, but also address broader concerns. We need a telecommunications system in this country that puts people first and profits second. During this COVID era, this last year, the digital divide is leaving people behind. It's become even more apparent. I joined with CWA in their call for broadband for all, and good jobs for those people building networks and delivering the broadband service. I know that Lumen can also do more to ensure equity inside of the company, stopping layoffs and respecting the union. That's one way they can start doing that. If you recognize the significance of Dr. King's life and his legacy, as you say you do, then Lumen, this is what you'll do. To the members of the Communication Workers of America, I say keep organizing for justice in the workplace and beyond. Thank you.
We are now very glad to hear from U.S. Congressman Joe Neguse from the 2nd District of Colorado. Congressman Neguse was elected in 2018 becoming the first and only African American in Colorado's history to represent the state in Congress. He's the son of refugees from East Africa, and his family's story and deeply held belief that we need people from all walks of life to speak up and engage in our democracy motivated him to run for office and fight for working people. His district includes Lumen's headquarters and is home to over 1,000 CWA members. Welcome, Congressman Neguse.
Hello, everyone. While I wish we could gather in person today to remember the legacy of Dr. King, I hope that all of you are staying safe and staying healthy. After the events of the past week, this Martin Luther King Jr. Day, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. brings a different appreciation and understanding. Dr. King left a mark on this world. His legacy and the ripples of action, perseverance, and progress have inspired every generation that's followed his. And his teachings are more salient today than ever. Dr. King reminded us that the time is always right to do what is right. And that is more true now than ever. We must stand up and do what's right. Dr. King not only fought for our civil rights, but for worker rights, because he understood that injustice in the workplace is at the very heart of the fight for civil rights. Civil rights and labor rights, they go hand in hand. Martin Luther King Day should be a holiday for all workers, not just some, but not just a day off, but as a day to remember and to recognize the sacred freedoms that he fought for. It is because of him that our world is more just and more equitable. Please stay safe, stay healthy, and stay hopeful.
Finally, I want to introduce CWA District 7 Vice President Brenda Roberts.
Thank you, Melissa. Good evening, brothers and sisters. I worked at the company now called Lumen for 30 years as a service rep and a credit consultant. In all that time, and with all of our predecessor companies, MLK Day was never a company holiday. Now Lumen executives say they listened to employees and made their recent decision in recognition of the significance of Martin Luther King's message of freedom and equality. Yet they must not have listened to our 10,000 members who are now disrespected by being specifically excluded from the day. We ask that Lumen do the right thing. The right thing is not just MLK Day for All. There is more. The right thing is to stop layoffs and healthcare cuts. The right thing is to pay employees fairly and ensure justice on the job. The right thing is to stop cutting positions which are necessary for the maintenance of our vital telecommunications infrastructure. The right thing is to build broadband networks in all communities, not just the ones which are the most profitable for Lumen. The right thing is to take dismantling racism at Lumen seriously by partnering with our union to work for real change. The right thing is to respect our collective voice and to listen to us. CEO Story and other Lumen executives, we ask that you make it right. Work with us, and together we can build the future at Lumen. Finally, I turn to my fellow union members. In light of the past year's events, I have grown in my own understanding of systemic racism and what it means to be anti-racist. I call on us to see that we all benefit from the movement for human rights. Wealthy elites who hoard resources are the prime beneficiaries of racism because racism divides the rest of us. All the rest of us, whether we be Black, white, Latino, Asian, Middle Eastern, Native American, we work for a living. Those of us who work to put food on our table and roofs over our heads must come together to demand fairness at work, because united we stand and divided we fail. Whatever it takes for us to overcome racism between us and amidst us, we must do, because we want good jobs and justice at work. That is the lesson we have learned from the life and teachings of Martin Luther King Jr. Together, as members of the Communications Workers of America, we can put his lesson into action. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Roberts. We know that the movements for justice at work and against racism are forever linked. We cannot have one without the other. We must stand up and we must fight back. Thank you to everyone who joined us tonight. It is wonderful to honor Dr. King's legacy and to fight forward together with you all for workers' rights and a better world. Good night.